with Naomi. Is everything good to go? May I start with the intro?
Yes, you may.
Okay, let me just quickly stop sharing. All right. Welcome everyone to day 2. Oh, sorry, I'm just checking my camera. There we go. To day 2 of our Inspiration Week. I am Tsika Bovula, and I'm the project manager here at Teens in AI, and I will be your moderator this evening. Building on the thought-provoking keynotes from Ingo Keller and Robbie Stamp yesterday, today's focus shifts to the vital SDG 5, gender equality. And our esteemed speaker for day 2 is Naomi Webster, a senior manager of strategic support in the Office of the Public Protector in South Africa. She holds a law degree and honors in industrial relations. Naomi's career has spanned various sectors, from academia and non-governmental organizations to national government departments and constitutional bodies. She brings a wealth of experience in gender advocacy, youth development, local government, victims' rights, human rights, and good governance. A highlight of Naomi's career includes spearheading the formation of the first ever Women and Gender Forum within a constitutional body, a groundbreaking initiative which launched in April of 2021. Her commitment to honesty, integrity, equality, and kindness have been a driving force throughout her impactful journey. So today, Naomi will share her insights on SDG 5, gender equality, drawing from her rich career and academic background. Let's extend a warm welcome to Naomi Webster as we anticipate a compelling discussion on a path towards a more equitable world. Welcome, Naomi. All right.
Thank you very much. I'm completely intimidated by the intro, so I'm hoping to live up to the expectation and the hype that you've created. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today, and I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Absolutely. And would you like me to help you share your screen, Naomi?
No, I think I'll do that on my side. Thanks.
Amazing. We're looking forward to it. Just going to
So thank you, everyone, and good afternoon to everyone who's joined the platform. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I think at the end, we are hoping to at least come away with some takeaways in terms of broadening our understanding of gender equality. So my presentation today is focusing on understanding the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is on gender equality, and the perspective that I'm using to foster this understanding is looking at a micro level, so reflecting on my personal experiences, and then looking to a macro level in terms of the social formations with regard to organizations and communities. So how can we ensure that our understanding of gender goes not just only from us, from a personal perspective, but broader to institutions and essentially to the world. So the way in which I have structured the presentation, I wanted to look at 3 broad areas. So firstly, just to gain an understanding of what exactly is gender equality, and then to look from a micro level. So part of my brief was also to reflect on my personal experiences in relation to gender equality, some of the challenges that I've experienced, and to highlight moments of resilience. And then lastly, to look at a macro level, so from an institution perspective, how can we ensure that we have an understanding of gender equality in the spaces that we live in, in the spaces that we work in, and in the spaces that are defined in terms of our country, our continent, etc. So let me then move straight into the opening of my presentation. So I wanted to share this image, and just for us to take a moment to look and think about what it is that we are seeing. And we're going to revisit this image at the end of my presentation when we then get to solidify our understanding of gender equality. So let's just take a moment to look and think about the image that we are seeing. Okay, so what is gender equality? So I thought the best way to provide an explanation is to actually tell you a story. A lot of the time when we talk about gender equality, it seems to be an abstract concept. But I thought, let me tell the story of gender equality and tell the story in a way that will enable us to also have some key takeaways. So if there's anything that you remember of today's presentation, I'm hoping that it will be the three elements of the story. So the story goes, a weekend, many years and far away into the future, a Black woman sat down and watched a movie, and the movie was titled Beautiful Darkness. It was released in the US in 2018 and directed by Monty Whitebloom. The second element of the story is a book, and the title of the book is Think Again by Adam Grant. This is a book that was released in 2022. And then the third element of the story is a memorial of a woman who had passed away by the name of Alu Nifale. So this is the story that took place in the far distance on a weekend where I reflected on the movie and the book and the memory of people dying. Now, just to give you a brief synopsis of both the book as well as the movie. So the movie is entitled Beautiful Darkness, and it's a movie that is set in the US. The family of this movie is a mother, father, and a daughter. The family is struggling with mental health issues. And what is interesting in the movie was that the father is suffering from Parkinson's disease, and the daughter is suffering from a mental health condition referred to as selective perception. Now, in the movie, the mother, who plays a central supporting role, has to navigate how she provides the kind of support that both the father and the daughter require. Now, what was interesting and startling for me in the movie was this mental health condition, which is referred to as selective perception. So essentially, this condition is where a person lives a reality that is distorted. So this young woman, who's about 25 years old, had spent the bulk of her life living at home with her parents, but for the majority of her life, her mother did not exist. So in her mind, her mother was non-existent. So physically, the mother was present, but the daughter could not perceive and have an understanding of the mother's physical, emotional presence in her life. So they lived in the same house, they shared the same amenities, they shared meals together, but the daughter believed that the mother was non-existent. And I think when we think about gender, what I want us to also think about is what is our lived reality and what is the perception that we have about gender and gender equality. Now, I want to then move to the next element of the story of reading a book called Think Again. And essentially, this book, written by Adam Grant, asks us the question and challenges us to rethink our understanding of society, to rethink our understanding of our beliefs, our opinions, our perspectives. And the question is asking us to move away from the triangular perceptions that we apply when it comes to thinking. That we think traditionally in the form of a preacher or a prosecutor or a politician. And so the book challenges us to have a thinking and a rethinking that is informed by scientific evidence. So you will recall many years ago, the world believed that women were intellectually inferior to men. Now, when you think about and how science then actually proved that theory wrong, you just think about the woman who led the formation of the drafting of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, Eleanor Roosevelt. So here's a woman who, through her effort and the work that she did, was able to actually lay the foundation for democratic constitutions throughout the world. And the work that she did also enabled development plans such as the SDGs. When we also think about many years ago, the way in which people thought about the world. So people thought that the world was flat, but science proved contrary to that. So the book is challenging us to think about and to rethink about how we think, firstly, and then secondly, what it is that we think in terms of just our society, our opinions, our views, etc. Then the third element to the story of this weekend far, far away was thinking about death and thinking about dying and thinking about the number of women who have died and the number of women who die in our world. And then looking at statistics which show that predominantly throughout the world, the victims of violent crimes and murder are predominantly men, but the victims of intimate violence are female. So just thinking about how, in society, what is the place for women and how do we then ensure that the lives of women find resonance in how we are able to advocate, particularly those women who have passed away. So thinking about Alu on that particular weekend, thinking of how as her life and her death had to find meaning. And so when we launched the Women and Gender Forum in South Africa, her name was part of the names that created our history as women. So this understanding of gender and what I would want us to then take away from the story, from the movie Beautiful Darkness, and I'm also going to answer the question towards the end when I speak about the macro level of gender equality. So the movie basically challenges us to look at how we perceive our world and the question around how artificial intelligence can actually help us and how it should help us to reimagine a new genderless society. The second takeaway that I want us to then take from the story is basically around how we need to rethink about gender equality and rethink it from our personal perspective and how we can then use this rethinking to influence our collective thinking to bring about a change in society. And then lastly, just to emphasize the point that we matter. So all matter, all of us matter, irrespective of our genders. So let me then get to our conceptual framework around what is gender and what is gender equality. So when we talk about gender, we're basically talking about the characteristics that exist. And we're talking about the norms and the behaviors that have been assigned to us. So gender, the way in which we must understand it is that it is a social construct. And because it's a social construct, it enables us to reimagine this social construct in terms of, the different norms and roles that are within society. When we understand gender equality, so it's essentially about creating equal conditions and treatment and opportunities that enable both women and men, and in particular girls and boys, to reach their full potential. So it's about ensuring that we are able to exercise our rights and responsibilities in a way that enables the full attainment of our human rights and our dignity. And that will essentially help to build a better society. So this is the understanding of gender and gender equality. Now, when we think about gender equality, I think the first thing that comes to mind is I'm sure many of you have attended gender reveal parties. Gender reveal parties are where families come together and the mother, the pregnant woman, is now about to, play a game. And in this game, we are going to guess as to the sex. And by sex, we talk about the biological differences between a female and a male. So we play these games, but what do these games do in terms of re-emphasizing the gendered roles that we attribute to men and women in our society? So essentially what we want to do is we want to then look at gender equality, not from the prism of the pink and the blue, but we want to look at gender equality from the prism of all of our differences collectively as men and women. And we want to then also ensure that we move away from our binary lens that we apply in terms of understanding the different roles that women and men play in society. So let's then look at gender equality and the evolution of gender equality. So over 50 years ago, the first World Conference on Women took place, and they produced a program of action. And one of the clauses, the declaration that came out of the World Conference, was a clause on the equality between women and men. And you will note that the clause was basically saying that there must be elimination of discrimination against women. What is very interesting is when you look at the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 and the targets that have been set. So 50 years ago, next year, we would be looking at what did we say in terms of the declaration around women, and what are we saying the SDGs in terms of Goal 5. What has been the achievement and how far have we progressed? And I think what is, it's almost as if like we have stood still in terms of advancing gender equality in our society. When you also consider that the Sustainable Development Goals were drafted at the time when the world was looking to a betterment in terms of the lives of women. So we had just come off the eve of the Millennium Development Goals. And the Millennial Development Goals did not actually speak about gender equality. Instead, they had provisions that spoke about reproductive health for women, but not speaking about gender equality. So when we consider the impact that the SDGs need to be making for 2030, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. The SDGs have also produced a country report which shows that we still have almost 100 years to go before we can actually attain some of the targets that have been set in the SDGs. So this is a bleak reality in terms of where we are in the world. Now, just considering and again, just looking at what is the state of gender inequality in our world, and some of the examples that we can look to is generally women are not at a particular place in our history where we can actually claim to see some changes. There is a lot of talk about the representation of women in political spaces. So looking at women in terms of leadership in political parties. But when you consider some of the critical issues that women are facing, so for example, in Somalia, which is one of, it's the fourth country with the most gender inequality in the world, and the challenges that are still taking place in relation to FGM. When you look at Bangladesh, so there was a recent study that was done post the impact of COVID-19 on adolescents. And that study revealed that food security, food insecurity has increased significantly for teenage girls below the age of 13. And this is because during COVID, teenage girls were not allowed to continue their schooling, whereas children were allowed to continue schooling. And the result of that is that there are increasing numbers of girl children, who are facing food insecurity in 2022. That's when the report was released. The picture in Afghanistan with forced child marriages. Again, when we consider the developments that need to be taking place in our world, and we think about gender equality, these are some of the stark challenges that are being faced. The study also revealed that in the United Kingdom, the major issue that is a source of gender equality is the gender pay gap. So men are paid significantly more for the same work that women are paid for. In Australia, the challenge of sexual harassment, the study showed that 1 out of 4 women had reported sexual harassment within the past 5 years. And then in South Africa, the economic inequality. So you will note that South Africa, in terms of the Gini coefficiency, women continue to bear the brunt of poverty in our country. And that is not only in terms of the gender inequality in South Africa, but just gender inequality throughout the world. So what does this mean in terms of our understanding of gender equality? What does it mean from a personal perspective? How can we use that understanding to contribute to changing our world? And so I wanted to then reflect on my personal journey and where I've been able to have an understanding of gender equality. So my background as a Black woman, being raised in a patriarchal but also violent and racist society, having survived gender-based violence, living with parents who, for my parents, domestic violence was an issue. And then transitioning into a career of privilege, having the opportunity to be able to then talk and demonstrate an understanding of gender. So being able to train judges and magistrates on social context. And social context is basically about how do you understand the experiences of women and men, and how do you understand that when you apply and interpret the law? And then having to work with victims and victims' rights in South Africa, and how the difference in terms of women and men as victims of crime, how that manifests in our legal system. The experience then of firstly growing up and not having an understanding of what gender means and what gender equality means, to then transitioning to a state where having an opportunity for being in an academic institution and learning about gender, and then being able to ask the very important question around why should the world be the way in which it is? And that led me, together with some of my colleagues, to advocate for an establishment of a Women and Gender Forum. So it's asking the question that if there is so much inequality in our world, what can you do at a personal level to bring about change? And in thinking about the Women and Gender Forum, we also had an opportunity to think about what can we do around gender-based violence, which I think everybody would know that South Africa is one of those countries with the highest number of gender-based violence cases against women. And so asking ourselves the question and wanting to participate in social causes that actually brought attention to gender-based violence was an opportunity that I think created for us the impetus to then form the Women and Gender Forum. We worked in an institution at the time where there were no policies that spoke about domestic violence. So if you were a victim of domestic violence and you needed to take time off to go to court to fight for a protection order, you couldn't apply for leave because it would have not been regarded as annual leave. It was also not sick leave. And so you're working in an institution and you see the inequality and you understand that gender-based violence is something that is real. And so what do you then do? You start to advocate. And I think it is in advocating that we then were fortunate to be able to get the Women and Gender Forum established in the institution where I worked. So just to emphasize and to go back to the story, what is our perception of the reality of gender and gender equality in the spaces where we are? What do we think about gender? What do we think about the personal relationships that we have in our families, amongst our friends, our co-workers? And then asking ourselves, how can we work together? So how can we work collaboratively to make a difference, not only in the spaces where we are, but the spaces that will enable countries to then take lessons and achieve the SDGs. So in 2021, this now is my personal journey. So what was happening in the world in 2021 when we formed the Women and Gender Forum? And this is where I now am reflecting on those moments of resilience. So we were in a world where coronavirus was ever present. We were experiencing lockdowns, and we were experiencing a world of uncertainty. And in that world, there was so much conflict. There was so much violence that was taking place, whether it was the violence in Asia or in the Northern Ireland conflicts, whether it was war in Ethiopia. There was so much violence taking place in the context of the coronavirus. But there was also moments of joy. The Tokyo Olympics, as one example, to say that the world can unite and the world can come together. In the US, it was the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and in the UK, Prince Philip dies. And in this context, the thinking that I was going through was about how can I then be impactful in the space that I was in. And so that is when the birth of the Women and Gender Forum happened in April 2021. And it was at that point, on the eve of the launch of the Women and Gender Forum, that one of the women who was helping to organize for the province, Mpumalanga, to also participate in the launch, Alu, passed away. So there were moments, I think, in this journey where you understand the reality that you are faced with, and you are able to then look and ask yourself the question as to what can you do and what can you do differently to contribute to making a difference. So taking some lessons. So how do we work in institutions where there are boys' clubs? In most institutions, leadership is male. And so how do you then influence and bring about change? So one of the ways is to ensure that we document the issues. So to document the issues and using multi-source documentation. So getting to understand, how do men in a particular institution, how do they work? What is the reality of their lives? How do they then see that reality permeate into institutional policies? How do women work, and how do women's lives then impact in the policy choices that govern an institution? Essentially, the personal then becomes political. The other way is to use the internet. So, using social media and the hashtag movements in 2021, that was part of the way in which the formation of the Women and Gender Forum took lessons from whether it was the Me Too movement or the total shutdown movement, and taking lessons in organizing. So, how do we organize ourselves in small groups to make big impact? And one of the key lessons, and this was my moment of highlight, was in 2021, building up to the launch of the Women and Gender Forum. So, with the uncertainty of the lockdown and the coronavirus, I was able to do an online course on digital marketing and machine learning. And I recall that the lessons from these courses were part of the empowerment that reaffirmed to me that women can and should get involved in things that are traditionally not regarded as women's spaces. Example, machine learning. So, at a macro level, and it's at this point that I want to answer the question around how can artificial insemination enable or disable gender equality? So, the first lesson, I think, from an institutional macro point is to then look at how do we enable gender machinery beyond 2030. So, the SDGs are going to end in a couple of years. 2030 is around the corner. How do we ensure that gender equality remains on the agenda for countries, for institutions, and for ourselves? And one of the ways that we can do that is to then make use of the frameworks and the machinery that we have in terms of human rights. So, to be able to look at international conventions like the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, how do we then get countries to commit to ensuring that they implement and they report on progress with regard to CEDAW? So, making use of international human rights instruments is one thing that we can do. The other is to look at the regional development plans. So, in Africa, for example, we have the Africa Agenda 2063. So, what is our understanding? How do we get involved? How do we ensure that we know what commitments the countries in Africa are to make towards attaining gender equality by 2063? The next is to advocate for internal policy. So, in our institutions where we work, we should be asking the question, why do we not have policies that speak to the lived reality? So, women who are menstruating should be able to have menstruation leave, given the complexities that presents to women. Paternity leave. Why is it that paternity leave is different from maternity leave? That then re-emphasizes the point that until we are able to take ownership of our lived reality and make our lived reality responsive in the policies that govern us, we essentially are not going to be winning when it comes to gender equality. And then collecting gender disaggregated data and equity stratifiers. So, in the work that we do, to what extent does the work we do impact on women and men differently? And how do we ensure that girl and boy children are able to access economic opportunities in the same way? And so, how do we ensure that we collect this data? And then lastly, ensuring that we all invest in our upskilling. So, looking to the future of AI. So, what does the future of AI mean for gender equality? So, firstly, the question is, can AI be used to enable gender equality? I think when we look at the way in which AI is used, it can and it has the potential for enabling women and girls to be able to participate. It has the potential for ensuring that empowerment is possible for women and girl children. But on the other hand, and this is the question of AI as a disabler for gender equality, when you consider the amount of data that is used in ensuring that, particularly when it comes to machine learning, that data and how we source that data and how that data then informs our design choices, AI can have a potential for disabling gender equality. So when we look at some of the biases in terms of data analysis, when we look at the way in which data analysis, particularly from a gendered perspective, how data is able to analyze women and men and analyze that in a way that favors men. When you look at gender bias, when it comes to Black women in particular, and you look at the representation of Black women in AI, then it is a disabler. But on the other hand, research has also shown that when it comes to looking at gender and looking at one of the targets that have been set in the SDGs around gender-based violence. So research has shown that there have been applications that have been developed. So AI applications, like for example, in South Africa, Rainbow SA. This application is looking at how to support victims of domestic violence. And then when you look, another example of an application around human trafficking, which has been developed, that is, an example of AI enabling gender equality. But the question that I think we need to ask ourselves is, when AI creates the reality of inequality, and the current reality that we face in this world is that of a gendered inequality, then AI does not support gender equality. It is a disabler. So what then is our call to action? So what should we do? What should we do about gender equality? And what should we do to support the attainment of SDG 5? So the first one is to rethink about gender. So let's think about gender not from a binary perspective. Let's think about gender and the complexities that both men and women, boy and girl children bring to this world. The second is to look within our institutions. So the spaces that we spend most of our time, those of us who are privileged and fortunate to work, the spaces where we are able to influence, and we are able to then, within our influence space, actually create organizations and institutions that are safe spaces for expressions of gender and different expressions of gender. And then collectively, how do we then work to ensure that there are enabling frameworks that will allow us to achieve gender equality beyond 2030? So I'm concluding my presentation, and I want to then bring us back to the image that we started off with, and to ask the question about what it is that we are able to think about and what it is that we are able to see when we look at this image. And I'm going to hopefully get some of you to answer that question in the Q&A. But the book that I'm recommending is a book called Ways of Seeing by John Berger. And the book provides insight into how we are socialized in terms of looking at images. And I think let me leave it there so that I can then ask the question as to what it is that you think and what it is that you see when you look at this image. Thank you very much. I will stop there.
Wow. That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much, Naomi. And I'm just going to quickly give a thank you before I open the floor to questions. So once again, that was an inspiring presentation. Your insights and expertise really, really enriched our understanding of this crucial topic. So I have a quick question for you before we look at the Q&As that have come through. Given your extensive experience in promoting gender equality across the various sectors you've worked in, could you share your thoughts on the most effective strategies or initiatives that you've seen that foster positive change and inclusivity?
Thank you for the question. It's getting me to think. Now I'm an advocate for thinking and rethinking. Since I've read the book, I've been really charmed about the book and the process that we apply when we think about what we should be thinking about. So, okay, so just reflecting on some of the work that I've done, and I should have said at the beginning that my brief was to talk about my personal journey,
Yes.
so that it should not come across as if I'm self-promoting. But anyway, so yeah, I think the strategies must be informed by an understanding of what it is that we want to achieve overall. And I want to reflect on one of the very first experiences that I had when I started working. And that was training judges and magistrates on social context. And it was focusing on, we had just at that time, I'm revealing my age now, but at the time in South Africa, we had just enacted the Domestic Violence Act. And so the organization that I worked for required us to go and train judges and magistrates on how to interpret the act and interpret it in a way that contributed towards the country's statistics. So there was an increasing number of women who were applying for domestic violence protection orders, but they were not being granted those protection orders, which put them at risk to being murdered by their intimate partners. So we had to then go and do this training. So the strategy that we had to do was firstly to understand what are the limitations that judges are facing in terms of applying and interpreting the law in a progressive manner. So it's having that context of understanding what it is that you want to achieve at the end. So what we wanted to achieve was judges and magistrates who are trained and who understand the challenges that women face in domestic violence situations. So we had to then firstly start by having the conversation with judges and magistrates to understand what are the complexities that make you not do what you're required to do. So I think just to, perhaps say it in a way that before you want to bring about a change, you must have an understanding of the issue. And to just have, a human perspective to it. So understand that we're human, we're all grappling with issues, and in order for us to achieve what it is that we want to achieve, we essentially need to work together. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you even touched on the biases when it comes to machine learning, but it's much more important when it comes to the context. So that's very, very interesting. Okay, and it's a pleasure. We have quite a few questions from YouTube, so I'm going to start with those. We have one from Phantom Nugget. Do you think men are concerned about gender equality?
Absolutely. I think we would not be at the level where we are at in the world. The work that has gone into the SDG and defining the SDG 5 in the way that it is would not have been possible if it was not for the effort of both men and women from countries throughout the world to ensure that when we moved from the Millennium Development Goals, there was no mention of gender. There was no mention of men, in a way that isolated men as a category of people who also have a vested interest in ensuring that the world is a better place. So men are definitely involved. I think we have seen significant progress in that front. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. I forgot. Another one from YouTube, from Wendy Modisel. They said, patriarchy is rife in our lives. Many men are raised to believe they are superior than women. Is it possible to change men's mindsets?
Yes, it is. I think it starts with the way in which we raise our children. How do we raise the boy child to have an understanding of what gender equality is and what gender inequality is? So it is possible. I think just having a conversation around gender in the home, so we find, particularly in our society, where boy children are expected to mimic their fathers. So the father does not wash the dishes at home. It is the responsibility of the girl child. But if we have that conversation and we change that reality and say that within the household, everybody should have the opportunity to do work, to contribute to the functioning of the household, it is possible to change men and to change their viewpoint. Yeah.
I agree. And then we have quite a long one from Michelle Burnage. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. The infantry, which is frontline soldiers, are all a male branch of the British Army. The main argument being the infanteers can spend months in the field. That could cause hygienic complications with women with menstrual cycles. I think more policies can be introduced to improve hygiene standards. However, in the heat of war, this may not always be possible. What are your thoughts on the UK adopting female infanteers? Oh, that's a nice one.
Yeah, that's a very nice one. Yeah, I think we must be able to, like, in the context of gender, we must be able to also understand our physiology, and that's the difference in terms of sex and gender, and what it is that women can physically do, and what it is that men can physically do. So, I mean, yeah, I think in an ideal world, okay, firstly, we shouldn't actually have war. That's the rethinking. And so, if we don't have war and we don't have national security issues, we then we don't need people to be in the front line. So, yeah, I mean, for me, it's something that I think I would want to think about a little bit more, but I would want a situation where we start thinking, and for me, this is a lot, linked to the movie, about the selective perception. So why can't we change the reality of our world, as opposed to having the world that we have and then imposing things as solutions to the world, if you get what I'm saying. So unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive answer on that. I'd have to think about it a little bit more. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Naomi. And I hope that was the answer that you're happy with, Michael. Very, very thought-provoking. So I completely understand, Naomi. I'm stumped myself. um, Patrice has added two questions from her students. The first being, what role did the movie Beautiful Darkness play in gender equality or AI?
So sorry, I didn't get you. You just broke. So what did the movie, The Beautiful
Sorry,
Darkness?
Yeah, what role did the movie The Beautiful Darkness play in gender equality or AI?
Okay, so the movie, I think, firstly, for gender equality, it had a lot to do with the way in which the family was organized and the role that the mother played in the family. And I think, secondly, just in terms of the way, and I'm giving the movie away, but hopefully people will watch it, you know. But it also, I think, in terms of the way in which the medical profession deals with women and men differently in terms of how they present for medical treatment. So there was so much to the movie from a gendered perspective that I was able to just, look at, and it almost mirrored some of the experiences that I'd read about. In as far as AI, I looked at it from the perspective of saying, so AI in terms of gender equality, it, for me, I think for as long as it mirrors our society in its current form, it then is going to replicate some of the inequalities that we find in our society. So I was looking at how can AI then create a reality for us that enables us to aspire to. So if our SDG goal for 2030 is a world where gender equality exists, what can we then do to support that goal? And how can we use AI in a progressive manner to support that goal, not only for the SDGs, but beyond the SDGs? So, is AI able to create a genderless society for us? And that's what I kept thinking about in terms of the movie. So, can AI create that selective perception where wars don't exist and violence does not exist and everything else? Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for that question. Switching back to YouTube, we have a question from Lord Microwave. How can AI be used to close the gap of inequality? And is AI inherently gender biased?
Is it okay? So how can it be used to close the gap? I was reading a research report around AI in the schooling environment, so in lower primary school, where and this is research that had been done in Indonesia, where they had created school teachers, and those school teachers were able to, in terms of the lessons that they were the lessons that they were teaching students, they were able to teach in a way that a human being who comes with, we present, if as teachers we present with the background that we come from, with our perceptions, our opinions, our biases, our understanding of the world. That's who we are when we stand in front of a classroom. And so we are not neutral in terms of how we are able to teach. As a human being, you are able to have favorites. And essentially, that's what the research was saying, that when you replace a human teacher and you replace a human teacher with AI, you are able to get better schooling grades from learners than you would with a teacher. So they did this experiment, and that's what they found. And so I think in that way, we can use AI to create, better gender equality. But yeah, the issue of AI and biases. So a couple of years ago, we did a conference on 4IR and human rights and the impact of human rights on 4IR. And some of the research that was presented during the conference was around how, in terms of facial recognition and profiling, how some computer programs were not able to identify African faces because they were essentially programmed in a way that didn't anticipate or recognize African facial profiling. So I think the issue of AI bias, there have been significant research that has been done to prove that theory around the bias that exists. And I think in the research, it then also creates an opportunity for us to then address and fix the biases and to correct that. So, yeah.
Patrice, I'm actually going to ask if maybe you'd like to open your microphone so one of your students can ask their question live. I'm seeing quite a few questions from them. Let me just quickly allow you to speak. Okay. All right, so you can speak, Patrice. You can just unmute yourself.
Hi, Patrice. I'm preempting you that it should not be a difficult question.
Oh, let's see. Oh, okay. Patrice, are you able to unmute, or should I just continue reading?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. It's a bit of an echo, but yes, we can.
Okay, so Suzi's here. Sorry.
You need to mute the surrounding devices that are potentially also on the call.
Yes.
Okay, not to worry, Patrice, but thank you for trying. All right, I'm going to read two of the questions from Patrice's students. The first being, how can AI help us to reduce gender inequality, which you've touched on? And then the second question is menstrual leave also for girl students too?
So the second question, in an ideal world, it should, in an ideal world, it should be applicable.
All right, and then the next one we have is from Safam.
Oh, I thought I was great. So we should be advocating for menstrual leave. Am I breaking, or is the sound?
Yeah, there seemed to be a bit of a break and an echo. I'm so sorry. You can continue menstrual leave question.
Yes, so I was saying that it's something that we also should be advocating for, not only in the workplace, but also in our schools. Why should we be penalized for something that we essentially don't have control over, and penalized in a way that, you need to take time off, but that time off is not recognized. Yeah.
Alrighty. So then we have another one from Safam. I think perhaps in the interest of time, we'll make this our last question. What would you advise to do when you want to develop an AI application to solve the problem of SDG 5, but most people around you don't agree because they haven't seen it as a norm?
So
they have seen it as a norm, yeah.
Well, they haven't seen it as a norm. I think one of the things that we need to do is to break the barrier of our understanding of AI, and to be able to firstly do that, so that we are able to harness support, to be able to try and, whether it's in a school environment or, in a research institution, to be able to then explore and ask the question as to, firstly, what it is that we want AI to achieve for us, and what it is that we want to achieve when it comes to gender equality. So are we developing it, based on achieving any of the targets that have been set in SDG 5, and what it is that we want to achieve. And I think in that way, we can then be able to get the support to develop AI applications. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Naomi. And before closing, I actually just want to read a nice comment that we received from YouTube stating, "Shalom, Naomi. I wish to compliment you for advocating the prevention of gender equality in local communities around the world." And with that, oh, sorry.
I was saying thank you very much, but before we leave, I wanted to then ask, did anybody think about the image? I wanted to find out what anyone thought, or what do they see in the image that I showed at the end.
Feel free to raise your hand, or you can type in the chat. Oh, wow, Patrice. They're watching from the projector. That's amazing. All righty. She asked if you can show the image one more time.
Oh, okay.
Lovely comments from Ingrid and Bev.
I'm trying to find it.
And let me just quickly share it for you. Let's see. Would you like me to share? Oh, there we go. Ways of seeing. All right. Feel free to let us know what your students think of the image, Patrice. And we invite everyone else to let us know what they think of the image in the chat, or you can raise your hand. All righty. Oh, Patrice raised her hand. Got some comments. Looks like a normal study collaboration to me, someone said.
That's okay. No, thank you. Is that, I can't see the name of the person.
It's Michelle or Michael.
It looks like, oh, a normal study collaboration to me.
And Patrice also raised her hand. And Aliyah says there's some diversity in the image.
So, should we allow Patrice? I see she's raised her hand.
All right, let's do it. Patrice, can you open your microphone? Oh, there's another compliment, Naomi. You're so beautiful.
Thank you.
All right. So I think Patrice might be typing.
Oh, okay.
It's a gender equality that is gender equality, because opportunity given to both boys and girls from different backgrounds.
Oh. Okay, I think maybe in the interest of time, I really wanted us to have an opportunity to just illustrate that when we look at an image and we think about what we're seeing, our perspectives are different. And we all come to appreciate, I think, the differences that we would see. But what I was trying to do with this image, so it's a random image it's one of the free stock images. But this then becomes a conversation starter to ask ourselves the question that when we see women paying attention, working together, looking at a computer screen, we see a man standing and having a conversation. What is it that we're thinking about in terms of the images, and what is it that we're thinking about in terms of how we all present ourselves in the world, whether we're women or we're men? And I think that is a conversation starter that will enable us to then broach the subject around gender equality and gender inequality. So that's what I wanted to achieve by showing the image. So thank you very much to those who've responded.
All right. And I'm not sure whether you still have time for one more question, which I saw in the chat from Felix. What strategies can be employed to create inclusive and supportive environments within AI environments, companies, and educational institutions where women feel empowered to contribute and succeed?
So I think the first strategy would be around representation. So we need to be able to have institutions, whatever the institutions are, where there are women who are represented in those institutions. So whether it's in, a work environment, if you don't have women in leadership positions, if you don't have women who are decision makers, I think that in itself is problematic. I think when it comes to AI and representation, we need to have more, and I'm so grateful that you guys have an organization that is working with teenagers and working with teenagers in such an empowering way. If we don't have more girl children accessing opportunities in AI, if we don't have more girl children being trained, whether it's coding, machine learning, etc., if we don't have representation, I think that is it's a major problem. And one of the strategies to address that is to ensure that we have representation in all its forms. So for me, I think representation is absolutely key, and it's a key strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, representation matters. Thank you so much. Thank you, Naomi, for your talk and your dedication to advancing gender equality. We're super grateful for your time and commitment. And to all our attendees, thank you so much for your active participation and your thoughtful questions coming in the chat, YouTube. Let's carry the inspiration from today's session into our ongoing efforts towards a more equitable future. So until tomorrow, stay engaged, stay inspired, and thank you so much for being a part of this impactful discussion. Once again, thank you, Naomi.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. All righty. All right, thank you so much, Naomi. We'll catch up later. Thank you. That was amazing.
Thanks.
And then thank you, everyone. See you all tomorrow. Bye. Thank you, Mr. Perfect. Bye, Anastasia. Bye, Patrice.